The first knock came 3 nights after my family left for the lake house. Soft, hesitant, almost lost in the wind. I told myself it was just a neighborhood kid playing games, but then I saw the time. 2:17 a.m., the coldest hour of the night. My parents and little brother had been gone for 2 days when the power flickered for the first time. The house, usually full of laughter and noise, now stretched around me, silent and watchful. Every old creak in the floor, every groan from the pipes, felt louder, deliberate, as if the house itself was testing the boundaries of its emptiness. I kept the curtains drawn and double-checked the locks, convincing myself nothing was out of the ordinary, because of course nothing was. Then, on the 4th night, the knock came again. This time, it was deeper, slower, from just above my head. Not from the front door, but from inside the house. The sound had a weight to it, like a fist balled tight, muffled by a thin barrier like drywall or plaster. I froze, staring up at the ceiling, imagining a presence skulking through the attic, pressing a palm or knuckle against the floorboards above my bedroom. The air tasted stale, electric, as a gust of wind made the pine tree outside tap at my window. But I knew that wasn't it. There was no draft in the attic, according to my dad. And yet something was up there, knocking, wanting me to know it was there. The next morning, sunlight dappled the hallway and washed out yellow, making everything look fragile and unreal. I called my parents, pretended to be cheerful, but all I wanted to do was ask if they'd ever heard noises from upstairs when no one was home. I even Googled settling house. Pipes thumping at night, raccoons in crawl space. Desperate for any explanation that wasn't the obvious one. Still, as the day wore on, I felt eyes on the back of my neck, invisible pressure closing in. That afternoon, a shadow passed by the attic door in the hallway, a blur of movement beneath the crack at the threshold. My heart stuttered as I watched, unable to move. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was wrong. But when I pressed my hand against the thin door, I could have sworn I felt something shift, like a large animal settling down just beyond. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I touched the doorknob, and the handle turned by itself. I scrambled back, stumbled down the stairs, and waited in the kitchen, hands shaking, listening for footsteps above me. Hours stretched, silent, but the dread never left. That night I gathered what I needed and made a nest in the living room, where I could see all the doors and the stairs. Every sound in the house became a reason to look up, to scan the hallway. The refrigerator hummed. The old grandfather clock in the hall ticked. Somewhere a branch scraped against the side of the house, and then the knock again. But this time it was everywhere. Soft, persistent in every room. Tap, 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 tap. The sound had texture, rhythm, like a code or a warning. I counted each beat, trying to figure out which direction was real, but the knocks moved, sliding from wall to wall, as if the house was shifting around me, or something inside was moving freely, unseen. I tried calling the police, but my phone buzzed in my hand, the call dropping before it connected. The Wi-Fi, the cable, even the landline. Nothing worked. I was trapped, cut off, in a house that had become a maze. At dawn, I bolted for the front door, but it rattled on its hinges, locked from the outside. I pounded, screamed, but the street was quiet, and no one came. The knocks inside the house grew louder, clearer, a terrible knocking that now echoed from every wall, every floorboard. And then something new, a whisper, so faint it might have been the breeze or nothing at all, except I could feel it in my chest. Melissa. I turned, pressed my back against the door, and for the first time saw the attic door at the top of the steps, wide open. The attic, which I'd never seen open on its own, now gaped into darkness. Something waited, up there, watching, knocking, waiting for me to answer, to come inside. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of old wood and something faintly rancid, something forgotten. I never went up the stairs. I never saw what had been knocking every night inside my empty house, if anything was there at all. Months later, after my family came back, I told them nothing, and the knocks stopped. But sometimes when I'm alone in the house, I swear I can still hear them. Fainter now, almost polite, asking for permission to come back in. My house has 6 rooms. I know this because I counted them every day for the first year after I bought the place, a habit I developed to soothe the anxiety of living alone for the first time. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and the dining room. 6. It was a fixed, comforting number, the architectural bedrock of my new life. That number was the one thing I was sure of, until the day I found the blueprints and realized the house had been keeping a secret. I found them by accident, tucked inside a wall cavity during a minor rewiring project. They were old, brittle, and smelled of dust and time. As I carefully unrolled the delicate paper across the dining room table, I traced the familiar layout with my finger. But then I saw it. On the north wall of the dining room, right where my heavy oak china cabinet stood, the architect had drawn a door. A door that led to a small, windowless seventh room, a space that simply didn't exist in my six-room house. I assumed it was a feature they'd decided against during construction, a ghost of a room that never was. I rolled the plans back up and didn't think about it again until the tapping started that night. It was faint at first, a delicate tap, 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 like a bird pecking at a window pane. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, and the sound seemed to come from the dining room. When I went to check, the room was silent and still, moonlight painting pale squares on the hardwood floor. I chalked it up to old pipes or the house settling. But the next night, it came again, clearer this time, and I could pinpoint its origin with chilling certainty. It was coming from behind the china cabinet, from the exact spot where the blueprint had shown a door. A cold thread of dread began to weave itself around my heart. Over the next week, the tapping became a nightly ritual. It started around midnight, a polite rhythmic knock that lasted for 10 minutes before falling silent again. I started to feel watched, an unseen presence hanging in the air of my home. The dining room, once my favorite spot, now felt hostile. The air by the north wall was always colder, and sometimes if I stood close enough, I could smell something faint and musty, the scent of a space that had been sealed away from the world for a very long time. My curiosity curdled into obsession. I had to know what was on the other side. One Saturday, I spent the entire afternoon wrestling the massive cabinet away from the wall. I expected to find a seam, a faint outline of a plastered-over doorframe. But there was nothing. Just a continuous unbroken stretch of faded floral wallpaper, identical to the rest of the room. I pressed my palm against it, and the plaster felt cold and strangely hollow. As my fingers traced the smooth paper, a single sharp knock echoed from the other side, directly beneath my hand. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping changed after that. It was no longer polite. It became frantic, insistent, sometimes accompanied by a dry scraping sound, like fingernails being dragged slowly down a wooden plank. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie awake in my bed, listening to the desperate sounds from the dining room, my imagination painting horrific pictures of what could be trapped inside that hidden space. Was it a person, an animal, or something else entirely? The breaking point came on a Thursday. The scraping was relentless, punctuated by heavy rhythmic thuds that vibrated through the floor. I couldn't live with the not knowing anymore. Armed with a hammer and a crowbar, I walked into the dining room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The scraping stopped the moment I entered, plunging the room into a heavy, expectant silence. "I'm coming in," I whispered, the words feeling foolish and theatrical. I swung the hammer. The plaster shattered, revealing dark, ancient slats of wood beneath. I hammered and pried, splintering the old planks, tearing a ragged hole into the wall. A wave of cold, stagnant air washed over me, thick with the smell of dust and decay. It was the smell of a tomb. My hands shaking, I raised my phone, switching on the flashlight and aiming it into the suffocating darkness. The beam cut through the black, illuminating a small, barren room. It was completely empty. No furniture, no windows. Just 4 bare wooden walls and a floor thick with a century of dust. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. It was nothing, just an old forgotten room. The sounds must have been vermin, or the wind, or my own overwrought imagination. But as I swept the light across the far wall, the beam caught something. Scratched into the wood, over and over again in jagged, desperate letters were 3 words. "Don't let it out." My blood turned to ice. My light darted around the tiny room again, frantically searching for what it could be. Then I saw the other set of scratches. They weren't on the far wall. They were on the inside of the very door I had just broken through. These markings were different, fresher, deeper, gouged into the wood with a terrible force. They read, "Let me in. I realized with a surge of pure terror that the thing wasn't trapped inside the room. The room was its cage, and I had just unlocked the door. The first time I saw it, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a distorted shadow in the bathroom mirror that my tired eyes had simply invented. But when I turned off the light and walked away, the reflection stayed behind, a dark shape watching me from the pitch-black glass. That was the moment I knew something was deeply wrong. I had just moved into an old downtown apartment, the kind with high ceilings, drafty windows, and plumbing that groaned like a dying man. The bathroom was the strangest room in the place, tiled in a sickly shade of mint green, with a single long fluorescent bulb that hummed with an irritating buzz. The mirror was the worst part. It was a huge, frameless piece of silvered glass that covered most of the wall above the sink, its edges tarnished with dark, creeping spots like a disease spreading inward. The initial sighting happened on a Tuesday. I was leaning over the sink, brushing my teeth when I felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you were not alone. I glanced up, and in the reflection, standing just behind me near the shower curtain, was a shape. It was tall and unnaturally thin, a column of shadow that didn't quite match any of the other shadows in the room. I whipped my head around, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. The shower curtain was still, the air was cold and empty. I looked back at the mirror. My own wide-eyed reflection stared back, and behind me, there was only the blank tiled wall. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, new place jitters, the weird flickering light. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. The figure was always there, motionless in the background of my reflection. It never moved, never made a sound. It just stood there, an audience of one to the mundane ritual of my nightly routine. I started to test it, playing a strange game with the entity in the glass. I'd move left. My reflection would follow, but the shadow remained fixed. I'd wave my hand behind me, trying to see if I could make it flinch. Nothing. It existed only in that silvered world, a silent passenger tethered to my own image. The dread began to curdle in my stomach. The bathroom, once just a room, became a space of profound anxiety. The air inside always felt degrees colder than the rest of the apartment, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of the faucet, each drop landing like a tick of a clock, counting down to something awful. One night I decided I couldn't take the ambiguity anymore. I stood before the mirror, my breath fogging the glass, and stared directly at the shape behind my reflection. It seemed darker this time, more defined. I could almost make out the suggestion of a head, of long, gaunt limbs. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shape didn't answer, but my own reflection did. The corners of its mouth, the mouth on the man in the mirror, began to twitch upwards. Slowly, unnaturally, my reflection pulled into a wide, predatory grin that stretched far beyond what my own facial muscles could manage. My real face was a mask of frozen horror, but the man in the mirror looked ecstatic, his eyes wide with a terrible, silent glee. The figure behind him remained still, but I understood then that it wasn't just a shadow. It was a puppeteer, and my own reflection was its marionette. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. My reflection's grin remained, fixed and mocking. I flicked off the light, plunging the room into absolute darkness, but the horror didn't stop. In the black, dead surface of the mirror, a faint, silvery outline of the figure remained, its form glowing with a soft, phosphorescent light. It was still watching. It was always watching. That was the breaking point. I started avoiding the bathroom, using the one in the lobby of my building. I covered the mirror with a thick blanket, but the feeling of being watched seeped through the walls, poisoning the entire apartment. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I felt its presence in the reflection of my darkened phone screen, in the polished steel of my kettle, in the dark window panes at night. After a week of this psychological torture, I knew I had to end it. Fueled by a cocktail of fear and sleep deprivation, I stormed into the bathroom, tore the blanket off the mirror, and picked up the heaviest thing I could find, a ceramic soap dish. My reflection, still wearing that impossible grin, watched me with knowing eyes. As I raised the dish, it raised one too. But as my arm came crashing down, its arm stayed in the air, its hand opening to wave a slow, deliberate goodbye. The mirror shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sound was deafening, a final violent scream that echoed through the small room. For a moment, there was a blissful, absolute silence. The coldness in the room dissipated. The presence was gone. I sank to the floor, breathing in ragged, painful gulps, the jagged shards of glass crunching under my knees. It was over. But as I began cleaning up the mess, sweeping the last of the slivers into a dustpan, I caught a glimpse of movement. I froze, looking down at the chrome surface of the dustpan. Reflected in its polished curve was my face, and behind me, standing in the doorway, was the tall, thin shape. I spun around. The hallway was empty. My blood ran cold as I looked back at the dustpan. The figure was still there, no longer just a shadow, but clearer now, its features beginning to resolve. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was free, and now every reflective surface was its window into my world.